welcome back to an episode of the Open Source Cafe. Really excited for this one because we have Rahul back on the show. We did a podcast with Rahul and Alex. We did one on 10 mistakes to avoid when you're starting to learn how to code. And today we're talking about the common traits amongst high achievers, if you will. So before we get started, we get a lot of questions related to mentorship since we are a huge student community. I'd like to give a huge shout out to the Taro app. You can check out the link jointaro.com. You can download the app and you can get mentored on your software engineering journey. But I'll let Rahul share more about it. Rahul, I would like to love you a little bit more about yourself and what you're building.
Absolutely. So first off, thanks for having me. I'm glad to be back. Last podcast we did was super fun. So I'm building Taro with my co-founder, Alex. And the idea with Taro is that it's so critical to have someone who you can go to for feedback, insights, and frameworks about how your career, how your job, how your career should advance over time. And so, in my own career, along with Alex, like we've been working for about 10 years now, and we've learned the hard way that, so much of your growth depends on having a good manager, having a good mentor, having a good group of people around you who you can learn from, right? And so the idea with Taro is, can we package up a lot of the best practices, a lot of the insights and frameworks, starting with software engineers, because that's what I know best. I think, Kunal, that's what you know best. How can we package up the wisdom and really deliver it? So your growth as an engineer is not so dependent on whether you get lucky with a good manager or a bad manager, right? It should be much more about, hey, I have the ambition, I have the drive to go and learn stuff. Of course, the mentorship is super important, finding a friend, and we'll talk more about how you can find a mentor, have a friend. But if you're not able to do that, especially in COVID, where, it's harder to make connections with your coworkers, you might be hybrid or remote, then I think Taro plays a huge role here. And we want to kind of deliver a lot of that wisdom and expertise to you in the app that we're developing.
Yeah, and thanks a lot for sharing. Rahul mentioned about the app, so you can download it on iOS, Android, or use the web version. But yeah, you can check out the link jointaro.com. You can download it, and some amazing resources are available over there. I checked it out. I love it. All the things that folks often ask me, and I was like, okay, it's all available on the application over here. So let's talk a little bit more about it. What was the motivation behind it? So when we talk about mentorship or having a friend in tech, learning together, most folks often get involved with communities when it comes to this. And you have a community as well, the Tech Career Growth community, which is sort of the same thing, people asking questions and collaborating and stuff. So how is Taro different than someone who is just actively involved in communities? Or is it a community in itself? Can you share about the USPs, if you will?
Yeah, exactly. So I think Taro, one way to frame it is a community. Like we really have, because one way to think about it is that we're introducing some friction to be part of Taro in a way that, Reddit or Tech Career Growth, there was no real friction, right? And I think friction is not always a bad thing, right? When you have some friction, it actually filters out the people who they don't really want the information. They're just a drive-by person who just, not going to really contribute. But if you have this friction, it's actually, in many ways, that's how you form community. It's like the people who chose actively to opt in, right? And so it is a community. Beyond that, they're like, what we're trying to do with Taro is make it the premier destination for you to upskill, for you to figure out how you navigate your career. So tangibly, what that means is kind of two big things that we're really focusing on. Number one is a Q&A database, question answer database. And what's unique about this is every time we have, more than 100 people now in premium, when they ask a question, we make that available to everyone in the app. And we tag that question with the level they're at and the company they're at. So you can actually very quickly see, I want to look at all the questions by mid-level engineers at Google. And that's a very interesting insight because now you can say the types of questions that a senior engineer asks are very different from the types of question a junior engineer asks. And I can kind of actually model my behavior or change how I think about my job through that. And of course, you also get answers from really talented people in the industry who have been working for 10, 15, 20 years, and you can learn from them. So that's like one big part of it, the Q&A portion. And the other thing, which we have found to be amazingly helpful, is this idea of a case study, right? And when I say case study, most people think of business school, right? So I'm going to go to business school, I'm going to learn about these different companies and how they operate or how they did well or maybe did poorly. What we have found is that when we have a case study of a senior engineer or a tech lead or a manager, and they talk through, hey, here's a project I did, and here's why it went poorly, or here's a project I did, and here's why I did, like, here's why it went so well, and I got promoted as a byproduct of landing that project. It turns out that you can actually apply a lot of those lessons, a lot of those skills into your own job. And so we've done around 4 or 5 different Taro premium case studies, and they've been really impactful for the members that we have. So those are the 2 things I would say that, yeah, we are a community, along with these really value-added products or services built into it if you join Taro Premium.
Amazing. Well, thanks a lot for sharing. Couldn't agree more. And I did not know about the case studies. So that's definitely, it's an interesting idea. Oftentimes, like, we do case studies, but we do mostly like tools around tools and around businesses and stuff. So yeah, it's very nice to see someone's journey, and definitely could not agree more with the point on, like, you learn from others' experiences. It reminds me of J. Cole. He says, "I studied the greats. I'm the greatest right now." Something like that.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, you have all this collective wisdom from people who have been. It's like a book, right? The classic thing about books is like, why do you want to go and repeat the mistakes of, like, the mistakes you make are not that unique. Certainly, someone has thought the same way as you and in a similar position as you, and they've made the same mistake. So why don't you read a book or read a case study, and now you have basically learned all this hard-earned wisdom that people took decades to master or learn about. And so what we're trying to do with Taro is, similar to reading a book, similar to reading a case study, how do we really make it super easy for you to apply it to your own career and supercharge it?
Amazing. Well, thanks for sharing, Rahul. Let's talk about mentorship and the common trait amongst high achievers. So I believe this common trait that we're talking about is mentorship, if you will, and not just having a single mentor, but also the community aspect of it that you mentioned. So can you share a little bit more about, like, do we need a mentor? When I mean by mentor, I mean like one person to help you, or how do you look at mentorship? What's the
Yeah,
correct way?
totally. I think that the answer is that it doesn't have to be like the actual form that the mentorship takes is varied. And it could be one person, 2 people, a group of friends. It could be a community, like the community you run. But I think at the end of the day, really what is the common trait among all the people who I have seen who have achieved a lot? That they have someone advocating for them, right? You need to have someone or something on your side to really help tell you, okay, here's some advice, or like, let me say it back to you. Like, oftentimes it's a reflection of like, hey, you're in this situation. Let me try and understand that. That is actually hugely valuable to really getting to the next level of your job or of your career. And I think that here's one thing that I think is the biggest mistake I see around mentorship is that sometimes people phrase it as, I'm looking for a mentor. I'm going to go find a mentor, right? But what I have found actually is the most successful ways that people have found mentors is the mentor chooses them. So it's actually the other way around. The mentor finds the mentee, not the mentee finds the mentor. And what I mean by that is if you go, I mean, me and you, we probably get tons of messages on Twitter and LinkedIn. And a lot of them just say, hey, can you be my mentor? Can you coach me? And, it's like, there's not that much incentive. Like I have no idea who you are. I have no idea, like, what your goals are. And so usually the way that these relationships really work is you offer something of value or you share your perspective, right? You say, hey, here's my journey so far. I've really struggled with this thing. I've tried this. And I think that, your blog or your video is really insightful. And I've tried this. And, you tell a story, tell a narrative. And then I thought, oh, now I'm interested. This person has clearly put in thought and effort. And now I'm much more willing to spend time with them. So basically what you're doing is I am now choosing you. I want to invest time in you. And so I think that's like the big thing that I think people should really try and understand is that you need to make it easy for people to help you. You want to make it compelling for people to help you by sharing your narrative, sharing your story. It doesn't have to be as one person. It can be a group of people or it could be a community, but you really want to have that kind of advocacy for you.
Yeah, love the point you mentioned about the mentor reaching out to the mentee. I haven't heard that before, but I relate with that. So that's a good analogy. Yeah, I mean, also what students don't realize is, time. Like, if people are out there, they're doing their work and they have achieved stuff. Obviously, like they're busy,
Yeah.
right? They can't mentor every single person individually, and that's something that most folks don't realize when they DM me or you. um, you have to realize that we get so many DMs, and I think it's good as well that we are not like directly doing that, because that way you get to be a part of the community, and rather than just two people communicating, you advocate yourself to the outside world. And that's what Rahul also mentioned. So this learning in public thing and all these stuff we share about, it doesn't mean followers, it doesn't mean high numbers or whatever. Learning public means credibility. You
Yes.
can may have that with 100 followers, you can have that with 1,000 or 100,000.
Yeah.
Cool.
And actually, one thing I just want to add on there is that one interesting way to frame the relationship with a mentor, mentee, or even just in general, asking any kind of question. I have a bug in my code, right? The one way to frame it is this is a value exchange. I'm putting in some time and effort in asking a question, and the people who I hope will answer, they're going to put in some time and effort. And so you have to make the value like it's like commerce, right? If I'm selling you something, it has to be worth like the exchange, the barter has to be uh, sensible for both sides, right? Like if I'm offering you $1 and I'm telling you, give me $100 worth of stuff, no one will do that, right? And so when you ask a question, you have to make the value obvious to the other person. And it could be, hey, I'm going to share my perspective, my insight, and that's valuable for me as a mentor because now I'm interested in you. Or it could be like, hey, I'm stuck on a coding question. Let me make it really easy for someone to identify what the issue is, right? So rather than saying, hey, Kunal, I have this bug. Here's the GitHub repo. Can you take a look at it for me? No one will do that, right? Hey, Kunal, I have a bug on this particular function. Here are the 4 lines of code I don't understand. And here's what I've tried. Can you take a look at these 4 lines of code and tell me what you think? Now, all of a sudden, the value for you is so much more obvious, right? It's so much more clear to you how you might be able to help. And so I think that if you view these interactions as a value exchange, I think that also is a really good way to be able to get help and to engage with the community.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's a good point for open source as well. In open source, like if you get stuck somewhere or if you're, let's say, a newcomer, most folks will not give you the right answer directly
Yeah.
most of the time, but they'll point you to the resources. They'll be like, okay, check this out. We have talks and everything, or resources and stuff. Cool. So we talked about mentorship. We talked about like, do we need a mentor? What do mentors do? What's the role?
Yeah. So I think the couple key roles I think for a mentor, um, I think one big one is just to listen. And often, like, I mean, you've heard of rubber duck debugging, right? I think a similar thing applies with mentor-mentee relationship, where I have this conundrum at work. I'm like, okay, I have 2 projects, 3 projects I could pick. I don't know which one to pick. Sometimes the act of me verbalizing the issue and like what are the different pros and cons of this team or this project or that project, that itself is valuable. And then the mentor, their job oftentimes is let me listen and be a good listener and reflect back at you what you're saying to me. And that actually has a ton of value. Like having someone who you respect just listen to you and say it back has a ton of value. I think that's one big one, just basically being a good listener and asking questions. I think the second one is sharing stories, right? I think when I try and mentor people or coach people, I usually don't have the right. I don't say like, hey, out of the 3 options, option A is the best. Option B and C are horrible. Option A is what you should do. I almost never do that, right? And I think most coaches, most mentors won't prescribe, like they won't be so prescriptive. So usually what you'll do is, hey, here's an analogous story I had 2 or 3 years ago when I was facing something similar. Here's how I thought about it. Here's my framework for how I approached that problem. And that is oftentimes the more impactful way, right? Because giving you the answer and saying, hey, option A is best, I mean, maybe it'll help you now. But when you encounter a similar issue a month from now you come back to the same question again, right? And so I think sharing stories about, here's the insight or framework that I used, that can be super helpful. So I think those are the two or three big things. And I think that, I mean, the third maybe obvious one is just the network, right? like I'm going through Y Combinator right now, and I think one of the amazing things about YC, which is a startup accelerator, is that they have such a deep network, right? And so if I go to a mentor, like a partner in YC, and they say, hey, I really want to talk to someone who is an expert in pricing. How do I price my product? I mean, within a day, they'll be able to connect me with 4 or 5 people who have done pricing at the top companies. And that's enormously valuable, right? And so I think those are kind of the 3 things that a good mentor can offer.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks a lot for sharing, Rahul. And you mentioned about YC, you mentioned about finding people, but folks who are not in YC,
Yeah.
how do they find one?
Okay, so I think that this is a really important point. Okay, I think one of the things that happens is like the way you get this advocacy that we talked about, the way you get a mentor, the way you find people who can support you, is you put yourself in a position to get support, right? Like no one will magically find you and then say, hey, I'm going to give you all this wisdom, all this advice. You have to go out and find those people, or at least give yourself a chance to get lucky, right? Give yourself a chance to get discovered. And so that's why I think things like Build in Public are important. Joining a community where you actually can start having a deeper relationship with at least some subset of the people in the community. That's the kind of thing which really can give you that inner perspective, which, that is mentorship, right? You want to be able to find that inner circle, find that community, and then offer value. And then over time, you can have that kind of mentorship relationship.
Yeah, definitely agree with that. I graduated last month, and I didn't go to college much because of obviously COVID
Right.
thing happened.
Right.
And initially also it's like a 3 hour commute, so I didn't really go. But yeah, most of the things I learned were in the community and the referrals and everything. It has been amazing. So I definitely relate to Rahul's point over here. Get involved in a community. Speaking of community, you can check out Join Taro, and yeah, it's basically about it. Cool. So can you just, we'll talk more about the COVID thing later on, but um, for folks who may be wondering, who are like learning by themselves or whatever, I don't think that's a bad thing. It's just that you can achieve much more. You wouldn't know the possibilities till you try. So that's why I share, like, be active on socials, or not just like having high number of followers, but active in the communities or projects, or just with other people who have already made it in that field, so that
Yeah, and I think
they know you and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think just to add on, right? It's both community learning and self-learning, right? It's not just one or
Yeah.
the other. I think what doesn't work is, okay, I have a group of 3 or 4 people, and I'm going to go study some whatever it is, Kubernetes or Python. I'm going to study with them. The issue is that, okay, then if you're completely reliant on these group of 2, 3, 4 people who you formed a relationship with, it's going to be really hard to make meaningful progress, right? Like the best people, they have those groups as a way for accountability and check-ins, but they also do a lot of work on their own, right? They do a ton of work. They report back and say, hey, I've done all this work, check it out, give me feedback. Let me go back and now do a lot more work, right? It's not just one or the other. I think you need both the individual work. You need to have the tenacity to just do something on your own and go deep. And also you need the kind of mentorship or group aspect, Build in Public, to be able to get that feedback.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Self study is key. Raul has a lot of experience with Android, for example, and no matter how many tutorials you watch with development, if you don't try it out yourself and don't you know get stuck on a bug or whatever,
Yeah.
you won't really get the kick.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. So let's talk. Can you talk a little bit more about the benefits of all this mentorship that we've talked about from the individual point of view, not like for the mentor, for the person who is seeking it?
Yep. So there's a ton of benefits, right? I think, so I'll start out with some of the tactical benefits. I think, like with Taro, for example, a very good example, like a very good illustration of the value is, okay, I'm at work and I either have the option to stick it out for a promotion at my current job, or maybe I could switch teams and that might derail my promotion, or I might even switch companies, which of course, then you'll have to kind of rebuild that trust and rebuild the relationships in order to get promoted. So how do I think about that? And so a mentor can really tell you, or like at least, going back to that thing we talked about earlier, they can share their perspective, their framework on here's how to approach that problem. Here's the people you should talk to. Here's like the pros and cons. And they oftentimes they might open your eyes to something which you hadn't considered. And so if you go through your job or your career with blinders on and you assume that, okay, I already know everything, I already know what to consider. I mean, you're in for a very rough career, or you're going to not grow as quickly as you could grow because all these people have so much wisdom and knowledge, right? Especially in the field like software engineering, it is quite collaborative. It is quite open. People are happy to share what worked for them. And so not doing that is a disservice to you because you almost certainly don't know everything. You need to open your eyes. So I think that's like the big one, and just in terms of awareness. And I think the other thing is more social, which is that I think, I mean, humans, we are naturally quite social, right? Like if I don't talk to anyone for the whole day, I get kind of antsy. I get a little bit uncomfortable almost. And so like being able to hop on a call with someone like you or a friend or a mentor, right? You need to have that connection to your job. And the way you do that is often through like feeling supported. And so that's like the whole point of a mentor is you kind of feel like someone's watching out for you, someone's giving you advice. And so whether or not the actual advice translates to like more money or a better job is actually kind of immaterial. I mean, yeah, of course that's important and that's what you should strive for. But just the feeling that, hey, I have this relationship with this person and we like talking to each other and I feel good after talking to them. I mean, that has a tremendous amount of value. So I think there's both the tactical aspect and also the social aspect.
Couldn't agree more. I work remotely, so the interactions get a little bit harder,
Yeah.
over Zooms so much. That's why I prefer like a hybrid working model, which is why I'm moving.
Yeah.
So yeah. Speaking of which, how do you think things have changed post COVID era with mentorship, and is it a boon or a what's the term, boon or a ban? Boon?
Yeah,
Something.
boon or that's like the boon. I mean, boom or bust is
Bane,
something.
Bane, Bane, Bane,
Yes,
Bane.
boon or bane. I think. Yeah, I think it's a really good call out. I mean, I feel pretty strongly actually that, especially if you're early on in your career, it is 100% better, in my opinion, to be interacting in person with people. Like, it doesn't really matter how many kind of virtual meetups or like Zoom hangouts that you do. The depth of interaction is really hard to replicate. Um, and so I think like one of the reasons I think Taro is really valuable, and I'm so excited to keep building it for the next 5 years, is because in a post-pandemic world, so many more people, like millions of software engineers, no longer have that ability to like have a hallway conversation with a mentor or a friend or a manager at work, right? Like it's so much more, hey, I'm going to schedule a 30-minute time with you for next Tuesday. And so if I happen to forget something or if I don't mention it, I have to wait until Tuesday or wait until the following meeting, right? And so the small little interaction that we get, which like when I was at Meta or Pinterest, a lot of, okay, hey, here's how the performance system review works. Or here is this really cool project that you wouldn't have heard about. A lot of that stuff you just get kind of in a hallway conversation. You don't schedule a meeting for it, right? And so I think that, I mean, it is tough. Like, frankly, it's harder to be a junior engineer now compared to when I started. And I mean, that is kind of sad for people graduating now. But I do think like as much as possible, if you can put yourself in a position to like interact in person, join a community like Taro, that really does have a huge benefit because you can get that kind of serendipity that otherwise you're not getting.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Been working remotely for like 1 year. The perks are out of this world. It's amazing as compared to what we get offered in India. So that's why and that's the only reason, right?
Yeah.
That's the only reason I recommend it, because the perks overcome the downsides of not being able to meet people in person.
Yeah.
Many folks are like they do what do you call it, or company offsites. You meet folks at events and stuff.
Yeah. Those
But
are
yeah,
huge.
when I it does a lot. But definitely when I met the folks in person when I was there, it was just something else, and
Yeah.
I
I think what,
immediately was like, I want to come here. Yeah,
yeah. And I think
hybrid
what
is
works sometimes is, like being remote is good. I mean, there's a ton of benefits to being remote, right? No commute. You don't have to sit in traffic for an
Hmm.
hour. But I think what's really important then is at least can you have some, I don't know, every 2 months, every 3 months, like you fly out together and you all go to the same city and you hang out for like a week of really tight like bonding time. I think
Hmm.
if you do that, if you don't have that and the entire experience is completely remote, I don't know, at least for me, it's hard to really develop those bonds. And without those bonds, it's really hard to grow and get mentorship, right? So I think the in-person
Yeah,
aspect is critical.
it's also like if there are no, like if you don't meet ever, then no, at least in my experience, it's extremely hard to um what do you call it, get in touch with the person on an individual level. So for example, when I met so many people, I've been working with these people like for 1 year, and then I met them in person, and the personality was completely different.
Yeah.
So this guy, I thought he was really serious, but in reality he was very funny. I
Right.
had no idea, right? But when I met him, I got a gist of it. So yeah, um, everyone has a zoom everyone has a zoom what do you call it, a zoom
Yeah,
personality.
a Zoom persona. Yeah. And I think there's also, I
Yeah.
mean, there's like this interesting human psychology thing where I feel like when like your brain, it's like a weird thing for your brain, right? Because like I'm sitting in the same spot, I'm sitting in this chair, and I'm talking to 10 different people on this computer screen. So it's really hard for me to change my mood when nothing around me physically has changed, right? And so I think unless you have that change in physical environment and you get like have this tactile, like I shake your hand or something, it's really hard to develop that bond just like sitting in his chair, like with nothing else around me moving.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. You may feel like that you know the person or whatever, you work with them for years, but sometimes you may not. You can only know it when you meet them in person.
Yeah.
Cool, and I think that's key. Like that's what makes us humans as
Yep.
well.
I agree.
Yeah,
100%.
yeah. Cool. And thanks for joining, Rahul. Really great, always a pleasure. And do check out the links in the description, everyone. Join Taro and all the other links. I'll leave those in the description below. Rahul's Twitter. He's now also a little bit active on Spaces, so do check it out. And yeah, thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Do check out Join Taro. You can download it and get feedback. Join the Slack community. Yeah, we'll see you in the next one. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks.